So I have a friend, Rick, who this afternoon was messaging me, and he was saying that he had read something, and he was like, "Have you heard anything about this?" Because he goes, "I just saw this, and I'm like, this is pretty crazy if it's true." And so he goes, "I'm sure you probably have, if anybody, has read something about this, and if so, what could you tell me about it?" And so I messaged back, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I have like a whole little presentation I actually did on this, because it's a really fascinating thing that if you haven't heard of it or aren't aware of it, it's pretty wild." And it has to do with raw food and versus cooked, and why cooked food tends to be more likely to promote weight gain. Not to mention it has some potential health problems with it. If someone's eating a lot of cooked food, there's like his question was, he said, "I saw this paper that said that if you ate cooked food, you see like these leukocytes and immune cells go up as though your body's producing an inflammatory response in response to eating like this cooked food." And he's like, it appears as though there's evidence that cooked food is a little bit more pro-inflammatory, more dangerous, and promotes weight gain. So I said, "Oh yeah. I said, I think I have I might even have done a video on that, but if not, I said I'll do one and tell you a little bit more about what I found." So the first thing is that there's several ways that cooking promotes weight gain, not just can potentially be a little bit bad for your health. Now, let me just preface this with that I'm not trying to say don't ever eat anything cooked, because I eat things cooked all the time, and there are even some benefits to cooking things in certain methods and cooking certain foods certain ways, so that if you're a little bit smart about it, you can get some of the benefits and avoid some of the negatives. But that being said, there are at least I would say 5 or 6 ways that cooking actually promotes weight gain. So the first thing is that cooking increases the speed of absorption in most cases of food when you cook it. So when you eat it, you'll absorb it more fast or more quickly. And when you absorb it more quickly, this tends to have an impact on satiety levels, insulin and blood sugar levels. So the glycemic load of a cooked food, which is essentially a measure of glucose and insulin response, will typically be higher with a cooked food versus a raw food. It also, cooking increases the formation of free radicals. So we'll talk about that more in a second. Like, what are free radicals? And then it also decreases in most cases, the antioxidants that are present in the food. So for example, when you cook an apple, you have like apple pie, you've lost almost all of the ellagic acid, which is typically in like a raw apple, which is a really powerful antioxidant. When you cook broccoli, you destroy almost all of the sulforaphane, unless you know a little hack that you can do to prep it the right way, so that when you cook it, you don't lose that antioxidant. So a lot of different cooking methods will really destroy antioxidants and potentially alter different types of vitamin and mineral content. Again, depending on the cooking method. We'll talk more about that in a second. So this, you can't see it here, I'm just going to describe it to you, but this is a study. It's entitled "Consequences of a Long-Term Raw Food Diet on Body Weight and Menstruation." Now this is important because there's the women who were, part of why they examined this is they look at these raw foodists who are eating exclusively raw food diets, and many of these women, they lose their period. And you think, well, why would they lose their period? Well, because they lose so much weight that this is very common in eating disorders or any type of diet where if you eat too few calories and you lose too much weight. And women, what will tend to happen is it's like your brain goes into a defense mode to say, wait a second, holy cow, if you can't feed me, then this is not the time to be having babies. Because if you can't feed yourself, how are you supposed to feed a child? And so the woman will lose her period, and when it senses a low, insufficient caloric intake to the point where, you are getting pregnant. And now that being said, this just goes to show that these raw foodists are typically eating unlimited they're not really tracking calories. They're just eating as much as they want until they're full, but they're just eating everything raw. And despite the fact that they're not tracking calories and they're just eating as much as they want, the weight just falls off. The raw food is so conducive to weight loss that a researcher from Harvard, his name is Richard Rainham, which I'll play a clip by him in a second. He doesn't actually recommend raw food diets for humans, exclusively raw food diets, because he says it's just hard you can't hardly keep any weight on. Because no matter how much raw food you eat, the weight just falls off. And you think about that for a second, and you're like, well, geez, what if you're trying to lose weight, right? And you're like, I'd actually like to lose a few pounds. Just think about the greater the percentage of your diet is coming from raw, the easier it is to lose weight, not to mention a bunch of other potential benefits. At the bottom here, it says at the conclusion of the study, it says the consumption of a raw food diet is associated with a high loss of body weight. So meaning like they lose a lot of weight. Let me see if I can get this clip to play here. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it or not.
My name is Richard Wrangham. I'm a professor of biological anthropology in the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. And for the last 15 years, I have just been totally fascinated by this question. What has been the role of cooking in human evolution? I discovered that very little is known about the impact of cooking, and yet every culture in the world cooks its food. And culture is in many ways the signature feature of the human diet, and yet we have not known in a systematic way what cooking does to our food. And what we've found out in the last 15 years is that cooking has a number of important effects, but more important than any in our view is the fact that it systematically raises the net energy gain that you get from eating your food when it's cooked compared to when it's eaten raw. And there are two reasons for this. One is that it increases the proportion of the nutrients that you eat that you actually digest and absorb. And the other reason is that it reduces the energetic cost that your body pays to digest that food. And both of those reasons are important, and neither of them can yet be really said to be quantifiable. But we think that the kinds of differences that cooking makes to food are in the order more of 25, maybe even 40, 50% of the calories than, say, 5 or 10%. So this is hugely important. And one of the amazing things is that if you look up on the USDA website on the number of calories per gram of a food that has been prepared cooked compared to the same food that is eaten raw, what you will find is no acknowledgement of this difference, no acknowledgement of the fact that cooking actually gives you much more calories. The system that we use, we in this country and in almost every country in the world, is called the Atwater Convention for understanding how many calories you get per gram. That system pays no attention to food processing. It treats all foods as though processing doesn't matter at all. And so we have a very big problem, I think, in really understanding the effects of food processing. And think about this. Think about the fact that over the last 20, 50, 100 years, the number of calories per gram may be tremendously increased in the real way that you absorb your food because of food processing. The great industrial food companies process the food far more than was done in the recent decades. And that means that even though the labels may not have changed in the number of calories you are said to be receiving, in fact, you are receiving more calories than you did in the past.
One thing that he's pointing out there is just that the way that the food is processed, that cooking is one of the processing methods, right? Is it makes it easier to absorb, and you just absorb more calories. You're able to extract more energy from the food by processing it, by cooking it. But what he didn't really go into there is he didn't really talk about some of the other ways that he didn't talk about the glycemic index or the loss of nutrients or anything like that. So if we look at cooking here, this is just, again, you can't see this, but this is a study looking at the vitamin losses that occur with different cooking methods. So he says here that just take cookies, for example. Baked cookies, B1 is lost by cooking, roasting, braising, or frying. B2 is destroyed if cooked with baking soda. B6 is destroyed by roasting. Vitamin C is lost when you cook in water. And you can see all these vitamins and minerals and things that are being depleted in cooking methods and processing methods. Cooking can also, says, causes mineral losses and renders minerals less assimilable by the body. They're a little less susceptible to damage by heat than vitamins. They're a little more resilient, but again, they tend to be lost when you cook in water, and that's where a lot of the minerals can be changed. This is a study looking at the antioxidants in broccoli. They say here, this article says antioxidants are substances that fight free radicals and that can cause cancer. Many antioxidants lose their anti-cancer qualities when heated. For example, 90% of the antioxidants in broccoli are destroyed by microwaving. So we go on. It says cooking produces free radicals. It says there are other epidemiologic studies that suggest that there's a relationship between the method of cooking and various cancers and heart disease. In one study, researchers found that those who eat their beef medium well or well done had more than 3 times the risk of stomach cancer than those who ate their beef rare or medium rare. Additional studies have shown that an increased risk of developing pancreatic, colorectal, and breast cancer is associated with high intakes of well done fried or barbecued meats. This article here, it goes into describing a chemical called acrylamide, and it says right at the top, it says, what is acrylamide? It says, well, acrylamide is a chemical that can form in some foods during high temperatures, cooking processes such as frying, roasting, and baking. Acrylamide in food forms from sugars and amino acids that are naturally present in food and does not come from food packaging or the environment. In other words, it's not like it's chemicals, it's just the food itself. When it's heated, particularly to high temperatures, can produce a lot of this chemical. It says, is there a risk from eating foods that contain acrylamide? It says acrylamide caused cancer in animal studies where animals were exposed to acrylamide at very high doses. In 2010, the Joint Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization Expert Committee on Food Additives concluded that acrylamide is a human health concern and suggested additional long-term studies. FDA experts participated in the evaluation and provided data from new research on studies on acrylamide risk. And they go on to say that, basically that foods like French fries, potato chips, meats that are cooked over an open flame, these things all have potentially high enough levels of acrylamide to where they can be potentially related to and associated with certain types of cancers. This is a study it published in 2013 entitled Changes in Glyoxal and Methylglyoxal Content in Fried Dough Twist During Frying and Storage. So they're actually looking at the process of making fried dough and then when it's put in the oil. And they go on to say that glyoxal and methylglyoxal are important precursors for what they call advanced glycation end products, sometimes called AGEs, ages. You can almost think of it as in they age you. They cause the body to break down and produce free radicals. And it says, these go on to, or the article goes on to say the effective frying time and temperature on the formation during fried dough was investigated. And they talk in the article about just again how dangerous methylglyoxal is as another pro-inflammatory molecule. This also forms in muscle meats when they're like baked in an oven or cooked in an oven. So you put a piece of chicken in the oven, and as it bakes, it forms this methylglyoxal in the tissues while it's heating up. This study here says determination of acrolein, another carcinogen, in French fries by solid phase microextraction, gas chromatography, and mass spectrometry. So they're looking at, essentially, in the article, they had a little a McDonald's package with a thing of cigarettes in it, because they're essentially saying that the thing of French fries was giving you about as much acrolein as smoking several cigarettes worth of the chemical. This is from the food book. This is all the way back in 1982 by the Food and Drug Administration, Office of Toxicological Sciences. And this is a direct quote from the article. It says, additional carcinogens in heated food include, and they go through a list of like 20 different carcinogens that are now known and recognized. This is all the way back in 1982 that they knew these things were there. That are, one of them, methylglyoxal, you have leucamines, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, cadaverine, eucerin, all these weird sounding, chemicals and things that are in different types of foods. Here's a study published at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. It says cooking increases disease risk and abdominal fat. It says researchers at Mount Sinai have identified a common compound in heat processed food that could play a major role in the development of abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. And they found this association between exposure to methylglyoxal, one we were just talking about, and development of belly fat in particular. So again, not necessarily just the calories, but exposure to a chemical that is related to that. And then here in this particular slide, I have several different, just little interesting studies that just think about raw, cooked. It says a study released in 2012 from a prestigious medical center found that men who ate just 1.5 servings of pan-fried red meat each week increased their risk of advanced prostate cancer by 30%. And men who ate more than 2.5 servings of red meat cooked at high temperatures were 40% more likely to have advanced prostate cancer. In 2003, they reported a study of diabetics who consumed a low temperature cooked diet versus the same food, but just cooked at a higher temperature. So same calories, same food, only difference between the groups, one got it cooked low temperature, and the other was higher temperature. Not only did the low temperature diet facilitate weight loss, but there were also reductions in blood glucose. The 6-week study showed that eating the same food cooked at low temperature reduced glycolated LDL, their quote unquote bad cholesterol, by 33%, whereas diabetics consuming the same higher temperature prepared foods increased glycolated LDL by 32%. So one group had a drop by eating more, raw or not as high cooked or high temperature cooked food. And lastly here, this is another study. This one was looking at mice, but we can see a similar thing in humans, was that they found that mice with sustained exposure to methylglyoxal developed significant belly fat. So Richard, the guy that we listened to earlier, he did a really fascinating experiment where they took, this again was in mice, but you see similar application in humans, was that they gave, when I first read this, I was like, this is fascinating, because what they did is they gave the mice, 2 groups of mice, they split them into 2 groups. One got raw meat and raw sweet potatoes, and the other got the same calories, same food, but just cooked meat and cooked sweet potatoes. And what they found was that the cooked group got fatter, and despite actually exercising more. So what they found was they had these little wheels in their cage, and they actually can make a little laser, and they can measure the number of rotations that they run in their little cages, and that gives them an average of like, oh, Charlie the rat, he averages 3,000 rotations a day. Well, as soon as they gave him the cooked food, they saw that Charlie started running more on his little, he had more energy, basically. I mean, think about when we have a lot of calories, our body does actually want to move more. And in mice, when they're eating, where they're absorbing a lot of calories, their body goes, hey, you got calories here, you can go do stuff. And so the mouse started running more rotations, but yet, despite exercising more, it got fatter. However, in the raw group, they saw, one, they lost weight, but they actually exercised less. So they actually found that their reduction in their normal activity level actually went down. And you think about that, why would they exercise less? Well, because as they started losing weight, what did their brain do? It's like, oh, geez, you're not getting enough calories here. We better slow you down a bit, because if you run around all over the place on that little wheel, you're going to waste, you're going to burn up those calories really quick. So the body enacted a sort of a conservation mode to try to keep their activity a bit lower so they wouldn't lose the weight. But despite the fact they still, on the all raw food diet, continue to lose weight. I'll let this last one here, this is just a kind of a humorous, says Men's Health article. It says, those new age raw food diet hippies might be onto something. A new study has found that cooking food actually add calories to it, making the information you see on nutrition labels flawed. And then they reference Dr. Wrangham, or Richard Wrangham from Harvard, his research into raw versus cooked. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why, just for health, weight loss, why just, I've talked about this a million times before in the past about why if you just even have a strategy of, when you eat something cooked, try to either have it before or during or after, have something raw with it. There are additional benefits that we didn't even touch on. So for example, there is a carcinogen called TMAO, trimethylamine, and some research showed that when you eat that, or when you eat a food that has trimethylamine in it with something like green vegetables, you can knock out a lot of the detrimental effects of that trimethylamine oxide. So like taking nitrate-rich vegetables at the same time you ate like a steak, right? So like having a dark green salad, a raw salad with like your steak could potentially mitigate. It's not going to completely, it's not like, oh, I can just eat unlimited steaks now, right? But it can mitigate. So just think about it. You add berries to a bowl of oatmeal, you're gonna have a lower blood sugar response. You add berries to something sweet, you're gonna have a lower blood sugar response. You're adding in things that are very anti-inflammatory. So think when you eat something cooked, you're putting a little bit of something pro-inflammatory into your body in most cases. And so by adding something raw to that meal, you can somewhat balance it out a little bit, So anyways, food for thought. That's it.